All right, all right, all right. We are live. We are going to be doing some reading and discussing today. We got Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. We're going to be starting with the preface, and we have different translations, so this will be interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think mine's probably a much newer edition since I bought it like a year or two ago.
Well, mine's like basically a pretty new version of it too.
Gotcha. But you go first, I suppose, and then I'll pick up when you want to move on, and we'll give any thoughts we have, right?
Yeah, alrighty.
And I'm also going to be playing Fallout 3 in the background, because Fallout 3 and philosophy and politics all just kind of go together to me.
Sure.
And also I wanted good visuals instead of just having to throw up a ton of pictures.
Mm-hmm. Fallout 3 fits my philosophy.
And mine.
Well, should I just start reading then?
Sure, let's just jump in. We're just doing the preface. We're not doing any of the introduction or translator's notes or any of that shit.
Yeah, because ours are different anyway.
Yeah.
Supposing that truth is a woman, what then? Is there not ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women? That the terrible seriousness and clumsy importunity with which they have usually paid their addresses to truth have been unskilled and unseemly methods for winning a woman? Certainly, she has never allowed herself to be won, and at present every kind of dogma stands with sad and discouraged mind. Is that? Yeah. If indeed it stands at all, for there are scoffers who maintain that it has fallen, that all dogma lies on the ground, nay more that it is at its last gasp. But to speak seriously, there are good grounds for hoping that all dogmatizing in philosophy, whatever solemn, whatever conclusive and decided airs it has assumed, may have been only a noble puerilism and tyrannism, and probably the time is at hand when it will be once and again understood what has actually sufficed for the basis of such imposing and absolute philosophical edifices as the dogmatists have hitherto reared. Perhaps some popular superstition of immemorial time, such as the soul superstition, which, in the form of subject and ego superstition, has not yet ceased doing mischief. Perhaps some play upon words, a deception on the part of grammar, or an audacious generalization of very restricted, very personal, very human, all too human facts. The philosophy of the dogmatists, it is to be hoped, was only a promise for thousands of years afterwards, as was astrology in still earlier times, in the service of which probably more labor, gold, acuteness, and patience have been spent than on any actual science hitherto. We owe to it and to its super-terrestrial pretensions in Asia and Egypt the grand style of architecture. It seems that in order to inscribe themselves upon the heart of humanity with everlasting claims, all great things have first to wander about the earth as enormous and awe-inspiring caricatures.
Hold on, Corbin. So, interestingly, a lot of the wording is very different, but the thing you just read, I think, is really interesting what it says in mine instead.
Yeah?
It's instead
What
of
does it say?
it says, it seems that in order to inscribe themselves in the hearts of humanity with eternal demands, all great things have to first wander the earth as monstrous and fear-inspiring grotesques.
Huh. Yours sounds better. Dogmatic philosophy has been a caricature of this kind. For instance, the Vedanta, I don't know what that.
I think it's Vedanta.
Vedanta doctrine in Asia and Platonism in Europe Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must certainly be confessed that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors hitherto has been a dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of pure spirit and the good in itself, which I think is I disagree with his views on Plato's concept of good, because I think Plato's concept of good is actually good. I think Plato had it down pretty well, and actually Plato's idea of good is what inspired the New Testament's idea of good. The idea that what is good is just the betterment of all mankind, and that we should strive to want to better all men. But now, when it has been surmounted, when Europe, rid of this nightmare, can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep, we whose duty is wakefulness itself are the heirs of all the strength which the struggle against this error has fostered. It amounted to the very inversion of truth and the denial of the perspective, the fundamental condition of life, to speak of spirit and the good as Plato spoke of them. Indeed, one might ask, as a physician, how did such a malady attack that finest product of antiquity, Plato? Had the wicked Socrates really corrupted him? The wicked Socrates? Was Socrates, after all, a corrupter of youths? I mean, kinda he was.
Yeah, but, also, it's interesting that there are theories that Socrates did not exist and was really, a metaphor or, a character made up by Plato to exemplify something for him to argue against.
Yeah. But obviously I don't know, what the truth is about that. Greek history is actually, really, it's really
spotty?
Speculative, because it's hard to pinpoint when a lot of those writings happened, and it's possible that Aristotle and Plato's writings are actually just way later than Socrates and Diogenes and a lot of the other ones existed, and that they were actually later writers that just inserted themselves into older time periods.
Right.
Had the wicked Socrates really also I think a lot of people that are really interested in Plato and Socrates usually don't have a very well adjusted concept of reality like people that are interested in Aristotle do.
Uh-huh.
I think Diogenes and Aristotle are the ones I prefer over Plato and Socrates.
Right.
Was Socrates, after all, a corrupter of youths, and deserved his hemlock, but the struggle against Plato, or, to speak plainer and for the people, the struggle against the ecclesiastical, oppression of millenniums of Christianity. For Christianity is Platonism for the people.
By the way, Gordon, most of the differences in mine are just a few different wordings, right? Instead of saying the vendetta doctrine, it says the doctrine of vendetta in mine. So most of it's stuff like that, which is why I really haven't been bringing it up. But if it's, really different, I'll let you know.
Okay. After a couple pages, I'm going to let you start reading anyway.
Right, obviously.
Produced in Europe a magnificent tension of soul such as had not existed anywhere previously. With such a tensely strained bow, one can now aim at the furthest goals. As a matter of fact, the European feels this tension as a state of distress, and twice attempts have been made in grand style to unbend the bow. What's by means of Jesuitism? Is that how you...
Yeah.
Jesuit. Okay. And the second time by means of democratic enlightenment, which with the aid of liberty of the press and newspaper reading might in fact bring it about that the spirit would not so easily find itself in distress. The Germans invented gunpowder, all credit to them, but they again made things square.
Didn't the Chinese invent gunpowder?
I have no idea. It'd be funny if they did, and then the Germans are just no, we did it.
No, I'm basically certain. Hold on. Who invented gunpowder?
I mean, it could just be that.
Yeah, Chinese monks. Chinese monks created gunpowder.
So the Germans are just taking credit for it then, I guess?
Oh, are they black nationalists now?
Well, I mean, you know that Nietzsche, like, greatly appeals to white nationalists, so...
Yeah.
Like, it literally inspired a large part of the Nazi movement.
Right.
But we who are neither Jesuits nor Democrats nor even sufficiently Germans, we good Europeans and free, very free spirits... Gee, I wonder why this appeals to white nationalists. We have it still all the distress of spirit and all the tension of its bow, and bow, bebo, bop, bop, and perhaps also, and perhaps also the arrow, the duty, and bow, arrow. So yeah,
bow.
The duty. And
yeah, sorry,
nose.
I wasn't actually following along with you there. Otherwise, I would have very clearly been able to tell you that.
Yeah. The goal to aim at... Okay, I guess that was the end. So we're on to Chapter 1. You can start reading Chapter 1, I guess.
Alright, you ready to see how radically different it is?
Yeah.
Part 1, on the prejudices of philosophers. The will to truth, which is still going to tempt us as many a hazardous enterprise... That celebrated veracity of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with reverence. What questions this will to truth has already set before us? What strange, wicked, questionable questions. Yes, questionable questions. It is already a long story, yet does it not seem as if it has only just begun? Is it any wonder... Almost started singing that song. We should at last grow distrustful, lose our patience, turn impatiently away. That the Sphinx should teach us to ask questions. Who really is it there here that questions us? What really is it that wants the truth? We did indeed pause for a long time before the question of origin of this will until finally, we came to a complete halt before an even more fundamental question. We asked after the value of this will. Granted, we want truth. Why not rather untruth? And uncertainty, even ignorance. The problem of value of truth stepped before us. Or was it we who stepped before this problem? Which of us is Oedipus here? What? Which of us Sphinx? It is, it seems, a rendezvous of questions. By the way, I named my Fallout character in this fucking run Friedrich Nietzsche because that's what we're reading.
That's funny.
A rendezvous of questions and question marks. And would you believe it, it has finally almost come to seem to us that this problem has never before been posed. That we have been, for the first to see, to fix our eye on it, to hazard it. For there is a hazard in it, and perhaps there exists no greater hazard. I think people have always looked for truth, it's just there hasn't always been documentation, and philosophers, as a fucking career and, calling in life, wasn't always a thing. I think people have always sooked truth to some degree, you know what I mean?
I mean, literally, the job of a philosopher basically is to question the truth. Something that separates, Ayn Rand from traditional philosophers is, that she, is more of, a guide to truth than it is, a philosophy in the same sense that, these other philosophers are,
By the way, Corbin, is yours...
Most philosophers are, subjectivists.
Right. By the way, Corbin, is your book organized the same as mine? Because that was section 1 of part 1, and then section 2 starts right after that. Is it organized in these little subsections like mine is?
Well, yeah, it's chapter 1, but this is a part 1, and then there's a 2 right after this.
But the chapters, or whatever, are really short. Because, part 1 is the bigger one, and then just 1 of part 1 is what I just read. So now I'll read 2 since the preface was longer.
It's similarly organized.
Okay, I just want to make sure so that we can kind of keep up with the same place, right?
Yeah, now we'll be on to the second part of it.
Right. So I'll go here since the preface was longer than what I just read. How could something originate in its antithesis? Truth and error, for example? Or will to truth in will to deception? Or the unselfish act in self-interest? Or the pure radiant gaze of the sage in covetousness? Such organization is impossible. He who dreams of it is a fool. Indeed, worse than a fool. The things of highest value must have another origin of their own. They cannot be derivable from this transitory, seductive, deceptive, mean little world. From this confusion of the desire and desire and illusion, in the womb of being, rather in the intransitory, in the hidden God, in the thing in itself, that is where their cause must lie, and nowhere else. This mode of judgment constitutes the typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all ages can be recognized. This mode of evaluation stands in the background of all their logical procedures. It is on account of this, their faith, that they concern themselves with their knowledge. With something that is solemnly baptized the truth. The fundamental faith of the metaphysicians in the faith and antithetical values it has not occurred to even the most cautious of them to pause and doubt here on the threshold where however it was most needful they should. Even if they had vowed themselves to de omnibus dubitandum, for it may be doubted, firstly, whether there exists any antithesis at all, and secondly, whether these popular evaluations and value antithesis on which metaphysicians have set their seal are not perhaps merely foreground valuations, merely provisional perspectives, perhaps moreover the perspectives of a hole and corner. Perhaps from below it is, as it were, frog perspectives. What? Frog perspectives? To borrow an expression employed by painters. That's a thing painters said? With all the value that may adhere to the truth, the genuine, the selfless, it could be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for all life have been ascribed to appearance.
I think the concept of selfless action is actually an impossibility.
Yeah, I think it is impossible to act completely without regard to your own self-interest.
Like, that's what I... Like, I think... Like, that's one thing I like about Max Stirner. Like, Ayn Rand talks about how selfishness is a virtue, but Max Stirner talks about how selfishness is literally an inescapable aspect of human nature, that all decisions we make are invariably guided by selfishness, and that there's no way to not act in selfishness. Like, and that actually I think is very true.
Right. Anyway. Where was I? Yeah, the frog thing.
For me, it's like that selfishness and cupidity.
Yeah, the genuine, the selfless. It could be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for all life might have to be ascribed to appearance, to the will to deception, to selfishness, and to appetite. So instead of stupidity, it says appetite in mine.
Well, it's like cupidity.
Oh, cupidity. Okay. Like fucking Cupid?
Yeah, I don't know what the hell that means.
It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of those goods and honored things resides precisely in their being artfully related, knotted, like a white chick with a dog, and crocheted to the wicked, apparently antithetical things, perhaps even in their being essentially identical with them. Perhaps, but who is willing to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? For that we have to await the arrival of a new species of philosopher, one which possesses tastes and inclinations opposite to and different from those of its predecessors. Philosophers of the dangerous perhaps in every sense. And to speak in all seriousness, I see such new philosophers arising. And that's the end of that section in mine. Here's the thing with that. I do think it is good to question everything to a degree. But if that's literally all you do, you're only going to cause confusion. And I do think that there are things that are provable enough that they are objective, right? Like the physical is obviously provable. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, obviously
that's... Like, we need to separate the psychological reality from the material reality.
That too. But, like, I always use the term, right, that we each have our rational and our irrational mind, right? Like, there are things that we know more or less to be true, because obviously perception is flawed. But I reject the notion that it's impossible to know, because that's a fucking retarded commie take. But I think that with our minds having rational, like there's the ones where we're going on logic, reason, things that are provable, observable, things like that, and objective. And then the irrational is where we get into speculative things, right? Like certain elements of philosophy fall into either camp, just depending on what element we're talking about. If we get into the minutia of it, morality is kind of split between both, because, you know, obviously I believe in objective morality, which obviously is kind of the point of this book that Nietzsche fucking didn't.
Yeah, but he still separated morality in a very similar way as...
Well, yeah, he just called it different things.
Yeah, like he believes like this sort of like a lot of philosophers, instead of believing in good and evil, they believe in order and chaos, and then they choose to separate things in that way. Like Nietzsche, Jung, and like a lot of psychologists, and because Nietzsche basically was the original, like Nietzsche spawned the field of psychology. Like all the the field of psychology was based on Nietzsche originally.
Yeah. Do you want me to do section 3, or do you want to do section 3?
I can do this part.
Okay.
Having kept a sharp eye on philosophers, and having read between their lines long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of conscious thinking must be counted among the instinctive functions, and it is so even in the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew, as one learned anew about heredity and innateness, as little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, just as little is being conscious opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly influenced by his instincts, and forced into definite channels. And behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, there are valuations, or to speak more plainly, psychological demands for the maintenance of a definite mode of life. For example, that the certain is worth more than the uncertain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Such valuations, in spite of their regulative importance for us, might notwithstanding be only superficial valuations, special kinds of naysayery. I don't know how to say that word.
Naysayery.
Naysayery. Such as may be necessary for the maintenance of beings such as ourselves, supposing in effect that man is not just the measure of things. The falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here perhaps that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is, how far an opinion is life-furthering, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps species-rearing, and we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions, to which the synthetic judgments a priori belong, are the most indispensable to us, that without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined, world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner, and a philosophy which ventures to do so has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. Hey, he said it.
Yeah, he said the title.
That which causes philosophers to be regarded half distrustfully and half mockingly is not the oft-repeated discovery how innocent they are, how often and easily they make mistakes, and, page flip, lose their way, in short, how childish and childlike they are. But how childish and childlike they are. But that there is not enough honest dealing with them, whereas they all raise a loud and virtuous outcry when the problem of truthfulness is even hinted at in the remotest manner. They all pose as though their real opinions had been discovered and attained through the self-evolving of a cold, pure, divinely indifferent dialectic. In contrast to all sorts of mystics who fairer and foolisher talk of inspiration, whereas, in fact, a prejudiced proposition, idea, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire abstracted and refined, is defended by them with arguments sought out after the event. They are all advocates who do not wish to be regarded as such, generally astute defenders also of their prejudices, which they dub truths, and very far from having the conscience which bravely admits this to itself, very far from having the good taste of the courage which goes so far as to let this be understood. Perhaps to warn friend or foe, or in cheerful confidence and self-ridicule, the spectacle of the tartuffery of old Kant. It's Kant, right? I think I've heard it said both ways.
Yeah, I would say Kant, but yeah, I'm not. I'm certainly no expert on that. Oh, I'm very easy. No wonder this is so fucking easy.
Equally stiff and decent, which with which he entices us into the dialectic by ways that lead more correctly mislead to his categorical imperative, makes us fastidious one smile, we who find no small amusement in spying out the subtle tricks of old moralists and ethical preachers, or still more so the hocus-pocus in mathematical form, by means of which Spinoza has, as it were, clad his philosophy in mail and mask. In fact, the love of his wisdom to translate the term fairly and squarely, in order thereby to strike terror at once into the heart of the assailant who should dare to cast a glance on that invincible maiden, that Pallas Athene. How much of personal timidity and vulnerability does this masquerade of sickly recluse betray? Would you like to read 6?
Okay.
Or say anything about what was just read.
So, am I correct in saying he says that we shouldn't deny false opinions? Is that a thing he said?
Well...
Or is he saying that recognizing false opinions is just as important as recognizing truth? Because
Well, it seems to me that he's calling like a lot of these philosophers.
Okay,
foolish.
so he is being critical of that notion then.
Yeah,
okay.
Like he's being critical of these philosophers because he's saying that their conceptions of, I think he disagrees with their conceptions of reality.
Gotcha. Yeah, because obviously with this approach with us reading it, obviously like it's a little bit harder for me to pay attention with number 1 because I'm playing a game, number 2 because we're also discussing it and you're reading it and then we're switching back and forth. So, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But I will, like Jordan Peterson like obviously agree. Like Jordan Peterson's like a nut for Nietzsche. Like that's why like he literally says the thing where he's like, "Up yours, woke moralists," because he doesn't like because he's a moral relativist.
Oh, that's gay.
Yeah.
Because Nietzsche is like a big moral relativist, right?
Yeah.
But you said we're on 6, right?
Yep. Although I think like Nietzsche's just kind of like when he says moral relativism, like he's still separating things into a duality as a substitute for morality. So I don't think he's even really far off from just believing in a sort of objective morality. I think he's just sort of like a stickler.
Right. Alright, let me go ahead and switch over to the book. Let me just pause this. Because I switched over to very hard because this was too easy.
Mm-hmm.
I like how we're like just reading shit like Follow the Leader does. And like discussing.
Yeah.
Although we're not farting up a tub, so you know.
Yeah, we need to do fart tub streams.
We are reading Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche.
Somebody asked?
Yeah. Lester Benjamin Peck is the one who asked.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy has hitherto been. Yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah, he was clearly phrasing it as this is what every philosophy is. So I think I just kind of forgot that because, because of the way we've been taking turns reading and, like, I don't know. Like, I can retain stuff if I am sitting in complete silence reading it on my own for an extended period of time.
Well, the thing about Nietzsche is he's, like, you have to actually think a lot about what he's saying. Like, Nietzsche's not an easy philosopher to get into.
Right. Anyway, it has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy has hitherto been, a confession on the part of its author, and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. Moreover, that the moral, or immoral, intentions in every philosophy have every time constituted the real germ of life out of which the entire plant has grown. To explain how a philosopher's most remote metaphysical assertions have actually been arrived at, it is always well and wise to ask oneself first, what morality does he, aim at? I, accordingly, do not believe a drive to knowledge to be the father of philosophy, but the author, but that another drive has. Here as elsewhere, only employed knowledge, and false knowledge, as a tool. But anyone who looks at the basic drives of mankind to see what extent they may in precisely this connection have come into play as inspirational spirits, or demons and kobolds, will discover that they have all, at some time or another, practiced philosophy, and that each one of them would be only too glad to present itself as the ultimate goal of existence, and as to the legitimate master of all the other drives. For every drive is tyrannical, and it is as such that it tries to philosophize. In the case of scholars, to be sure, it is the case in the case of really scientific men, trademark, things may be different, better, if you will. There may really exist something like a drive to knowledge there, some little independent clockwork, which, when wound up, works bravely on without any of the scholar's other drives playing any essential part. The scholar's real interests, therefore, generally lie in quite another direction. Perhaps in his family, or in making money, or in politics. It is indeed almost a matter of indifference whether his little machine is set up in this region of science, or that whether the promising young worker, call them workers, makes himself into a good philologist, or a specialist in fungus, or a chemist. he is not characterized by becoming this or that. In the philosopher, on the contrary, there is nothing whatever impersonal, and above all, his morality bears decided and decisive testimony to who he is. That is to say, to the order of rank, the innermost drives of his nature stand in relative to one another. Now we're on 7. How malicious philosophers can be. I know of nothing more venomous than the joke of Epicurus allowed himself to make against Plato and the Platonists. He called them Jesus Christ. He didn't call them Jesus Christ. Dionysio Kalakis. We're gonna say that. That's how I'm gonna say it. Fuck it. The literal and foreground meaning of the word is flatterers of Dionysus.
Mm-hmm.
Dinamite! You know, the fucking squirrel from Hoodwinked? That is to say, tyrants, hangers-on, and lick spittles. In addition, however, it is as much to say as they are all actors. Actors. You know, and it zooms in on SpongeBob's lips. There is nothing more genuine about them. For Dionysial was a popular term for an actor. And the latter meaning...
Dionysio Colax is how I'd say it.
Dionysio Colax. Yeah. That makes sense. It's just a stupid word. Like, I don't like it.
These are just, like, words for people that believe in, like, a Dionysian philosophy.
Right.
I mean, I think there's easier ways to word it, but...
Right, no, it's not that I necessarily have a problem with it, it's just... There's so many fucking vowels in weird spots with it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it is a translation of German.
Yeah, well, and I don't think these words are German, I think these words are Greek.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dionysio Colax was a popular term for an actor, and the latter meaning is really a piece of malice that Epicurus discharged at Plato. He was annoyed by the grandiose manner, the mise en scene, of which Plato and his pupils were masters, of which Epicurus was not a master. He, the old school teacher from Samos, you know, the chick from Metroid, no, that's Samus, who sat hidden in his little garden at Athens. The garden is looking very homosexual this morning. And wrote 300 books. Who knows? Perhaps out of the rage at Plato and ambitious envy of him, it took a century for Greece to find out who this homosexual garden god, it doesn't say homosexual, I'm adding that in, of course, Epicurus had been. Did it find out? Alright, 8 is really short. In every philosophy, there is a point at which the philosopher's conviction appears. On the scene, or to put it in the words of an ancient mystery, advenivat asinus pulcher et fortissimus.
And then you fucking, like, summoned, like, some kind of demon reading this.
Right? Alright, 9.
Can I read?
Of course.
You desire to live according to nature, oh, you noble Stoics. What fraud of words. Okay, he's gonna shit on Stoicism, I guess. Imagine to yourselves a being like nature, boundlessly extravagant, boundlessly indifferent, without purpose or consideration, without pity or justice, at once fruitful and barren, or consideration, without pity or wait, I just fucking read the same line twice. And uncertain, imagine to yourselves indifference as a power. How could you live in accordance with such indifference? To live is not that just endeavoring to be otherwise than this nature, Is not living, valuing, preferring, being unjust, being limited, endeavoring to be different. And granted that your imperative, living according to nature, means actually the same as living according to life. How could you do differently? Why should you make a principle out of what you yourselves are and must be? In reality, however, it is quite otherwise with you. While you pretend to read with rapture the canon of your law in nature, you want something quite the contrary, you extraordinary stage players and self-deluders. In your pride, you wish to dictate your morals and ideals to nature herself, and to incorporate them therein. You insist that it shall be nature according to the Stoa, and would like everything to be made after your own image as a vast eternal glorification and generalism of Stoicism. Like, all this stuff he's saying, like, he's acting like it's in a negative context, but it all sounds good to me.
Yeah.
With all your love for truth, you have forced yourselves so long, so persistently, and with such hypnotic rigidity to see nature falsely, that is to say, stoically, that you are... Okay, falsely, he's saying falsely and
yeah,
stoically.
He's saying falsely, stoically, hardly different.
Yeah, he's gonna be a prick. That you are no longer able to see it otherwise, and to crown all, some unfathomable superciliousness.
Let me see. Where what's the word?
Super. I don't know if you would pronounce the C as a K or a S.
We're still on 9, right? Or are you on 10?
Superciliousness. I'm on 9. It's just a long fucking thing. Unfathomable superciliousness gives you the bedlamite hope. The bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves.
So superciliousness or whatever it is isn't in mine, so I can't help you there.
Superciliousness.
Superciliousness. Super silly.
Yeah. I'm gonna assume it's
It's probably superciliousness.
We're smart boys. Gives you the bedlamite hope that because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves. Well, I honestly, I'm gonna have to fucking, like... The thing is, like, at some point I should probably write down a lot of the philosophers he mentions in this, so that I can read them and, like, understand more about what he's criticizing. But I mean, when he's talking about Stoicism, I overall get what he means, because I know about Stoicism. And when he's critiquing Plato, I understand. But certain things, obviously, I'm not going to get, because I haven't read the same books he has.
Right.
That because you are able to tyrannize over yourselves, Stoicism is self-tyranny. Nature will also allow herself to be tyrannized over. Is not the Stoic a part of nature? But this is an old and everlasting story. What happened in old times with the Stoics still happens today. As soon as ever a philosophy begins to believe in itself, it always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical impulse itself, the most spiritual will to power, the will to creation of the world, the will to the causa prima. I mean, at least Stoics don't, like, go into, like, a fucking stage of fucking insanity because they question everything to a point where they fucking go nuts. Like, he's shitting on Stoics, but eventually he'll be shitting his pants.
But will he shit his pants as much as Carl Jung eating a breakfast burrito?
Oh yeah, that video. The eagerness and subtlety, I should even say craftiness, with which the problem of the real and the apparent world is dealt with at present throughout Europe, furnishes food for thought and attention, and he who hears only a will to truth in the see, that's like the thing he says though, is the will to truth, like you can will the truth. In the background and nothing else, cannot certainly boast of the sharpest ears, and rare and isolated cases, it may really have happened that such a will to truth, a certain extravagant and adventurous pluck, a metaphysician's ambition of the forlorn hope, has participated therein, that which in the end always prefers a handful of certainty to a whole cartload of beautiful possibilities. There may even be puritanical fanatics of conscience who prefer to put their last trust in a sure nothing rather than in an uncertain something. But that is nihilism, and the sign of a despairing, morally wearied soul, notwithstanding the courageous bearing such a virtue may display. It seems, however, to be otherwise with stronger and livelier thinkers, who are still eager for life, in that they side against appearance and speak superciliously of perspective, in that they rank the superciliously
of perspective. That's how I'm going to say it.
Superciliously. See, when you say that, I literally can't read it any other way. You fucking me over. Of perspective. In that they rank the credibility of their own bodies about as low as the credibility of the ocular evidence that the earth stands still, and thus apparently allowing with complacency their securest possession to escape. For what does one at present believe in more firmly than in one's body? Who knows if they are not really trying to win back something which was formerly an even securer possession, something of the old domain of the faith of former times, perhaps the immortal soul, perhaps the old God, in short, ideas by which they could live better, that is to say, more vigorously and more joyously, than by modern ideas. There is distrust of these modern ideas in this mode of looking at things, a disbelief in all that has been constructed yesterday and today. There is perhaps some slight admixture of satiety, and scorn, which can no longer endure the bric-a-brac of ideas of the most varied origins, such as so-called positivism at present throws on the market a disgust of the more refined taste of the village fair, mottliness and patchiness of all these reality philosophasters, in whom there is philosophasters.
That would be my guess, yeah.
In whom there is nothing either new or true except this mottliness. Therein it seems to me that we should agree with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct which repels them from modern reality is unrefuted. What do their retrograde by paths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away therefrom. A little more strength, swing, courage, and artistic power, and they would be off and not back.
Is he saying return to monkey?
Return to monkey? I would. That would be good.
Because, is he saying just reject modern knowledge and accept the wisdom of the past, or is he saying reject knowledge in general?
Well, therein, let me reread this one part. Therein it seems to me that we should agree with those skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of the present day. Their instinct which repels them from modern reality is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away therefrom.
Okay, so no. What he is saying is that, reject realism and accept nonsense.
Yeah, I wonder why he ended up a gibbering idiot who shits himself.
Did he literally shit himself? Is that why you keep saying that?
He literally became retarded, so I imagine he did. That, or I'm fucking it'd be funny if a bunch of I pissed off fans of Nietzsche or something.
Well, to be fair, I like some of what Nietzsche says. It's not like we wholesale disregard it. There is a lot of good stuff in here. It's just he also says shit like don't accept realism.
Yeah. I just think it's funny. Like all these like philosophers, like because they like doubt reality so much, they just end up going insane.
Ukraine and I go insane.
It seems to me that there is everywhere an
It
attempt
seems
at
today
present
that all you see.
that all you see. To me, that there is everywhere an attempt to present to divert attention from the actual influence which Kant exercised on German philosophy, and especially, yeah, fuck Kant though, by the way, German philosophy, and especially to ignore prudently the value which he set upon himself. Kant was first and foremost proud of his table of categories.
There's a reason he's named Kant and not Cam.
Yeah, categories with it in his hand.
Although,
he said,
are we going to read anything of Kant at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I want to read like all the philosophers.
Yeah.
This is the most difficult thing that could ever be undertaken on behalf of metaphysics. Let us only understand this could be. Also, once we read a lot of these philosophers, we should reread Nietzsche since he references them a lot.
Yeah.
And then, like, a better understanding and everything.
Right.
He was proud of having discovered
Proud!
a new faculty in man, the faculty of synthetic judgment a priori, granting that he deceived himself in this matter. The development and rapid flourishing of German philosophy depended nevertheless on his pride and on the eager rivalry of the younger generation to discover, if possible, something at all events new faculties of which to be still prouder. But let us reflect for a moment. It is high time to do so. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Kant asks himself, and what is really his answer, by means of a means, faculty, but unfortunately not in 5 words, but so circumstantially, imposingly, and with such display of German profundity and verbal flourishes, that one altogether loses sight of the comical
Not gonna work here anymore anyway.
Not gonna work here anymore. Involved in such an answer. People were beside themselves with delight over this new faculty, and the jubilation reached its climax when Kant further discovered a moral faculty in man. Kant's moral judgments are like one of his weakest aspects of his philosophy. For at that time Germans were still moral, not yet dabbling in the politics of hard fact. Then came the honeymoon of German philosophy. All the young theologians of the Tübingen institution went immediately into the groves, all seeking for faculties, and what did they not find in that innocent, rich, and still youthful period of the German spirit to which Romanticism, the malicious fairy piped and the malicious fairy piped and sang, when one could not yet distinguish between finding and inventing. Above all, a faculty for the transcendental. Schelling christened it intellectual intuition, and thereby gratified the most earnest longings of the naturally pious, inclined Germans. One can do no greater wrong to the whole of this exuberant and eccentric movement, which was really youthfulness, notwithstanding that it disguised itself so boldly in hoary, and senile conceptions, than to take it seriously, or even like seriously. Anybody watches this, they're gonna be like, fucking, like, these guys have brain rot. Seriously, or even treat it with moral indignation enough. However, the world grew older, and the dream vanished. A time came when people rubbed their foreheads, and they still rub them today. People had been dreaming, and first and foremost, old Kant, by means of a means, faculty, he had said, or at least meant to say, but is that an answer, an explanation, or is it not rather merely a repetition of the question, how does opium induce sleep? by means of a means, faculty, namely the virtus dormitiva, replies the doctor
Dynamite!
Que est in I'm not bothering reading this shit. It's not even in my language. Like, it's not even in English, so why the fuck bother? But such replies belong to the realm of comedy, and it is high time to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, by another question, why is belief in such judgments necessary? In effect, it is high time that we should understand that such judgments must be believed to be true for the sake of the preservation of creatures like ourselves, though they still might naturally be false judgments. Or more plainly spoken, and roughly and readily, synthetic judgments a priori should not be possible at all. We have no right to them in our mouths. They are nothing but false judgments. Only, of course, the belief in their truth is necessary, as plausible belief and ocular evidence belonging to the perspective view of life. And finally, to call to mind the enormous influence which German philosophy, I hope you understand, its right to inverted commas, goose feet, has exercised throughout the whole of Europe. There is no doubt that a certain virtus dormitiva had a share in it, thanks to German philosophy. It was a delight to the noble idlers, the virtuous, the mystics, the artists, the 3/4 Christians, and the political obscurantists.
But what about the 3/5 Christians?
Obscurantists of all nations, to find an antidote to the still overwhelming sensualism which overflowed from the last century into this, in short, sensus as superi. Fuck you. You can read 12.
Okay.
You piece of shit.
Alright. Let's see here. As for materialistic atomism, it is one of the best refuted things there are, and perhaps no scholar in Europe is still so unscholarly today as to accord it serious significance except for handy everyday use, as an abbreviated means of expression. Thanks above all to Pole Boscovich, who, together with the Pole Copernicus, has been the greatest and most triumphant opponent of the ocular evidence hitherto. For while Copernicus persuaded us to believe, contrary to all senses, that the earth does not stand firm, Boscovich taught us to abjure belief in the last thing of earth that stood firm, belief in substance in matter, in the earth residuum, and the particle atom. It was the greatest triumph over the senses hitherto achieved on earth. One must, however, go still further and also declare war, a remorseless war of the knife, on the atomistic need, which, like the more famous metaphysical need, still goes on living a dangerous afterlife in regions where no one suspects it. One must also first of all finish off that other and more fateful atomism which Christianity has taught best and longest, the soul atomism. Let this expression be allowed to designate that belief which regards the soul as being something indestructible, eternal, indivisible, as monad, as an atomism. This belief...
By the way, the monad is literally just means God. It's Gnostics literally refer to God as the monad.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that wasn't a term. I guess monotheism, monad, maybe it's kind of got the same root there. Because it's the one, right? Because God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, where the fuck was I?
Monad.
Yeah, anyway, this belief ought to be ejected from science. I mean, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with believing in the soul. The soul is just something intangible that can't really be observed. Like, that's, again, separating out the speculative from the rational, you know? Like, I think that is something that we all do in our own ways, like, for different things, you know?
I do think, though, that, like, the concept of the soul scientifically shouldn't be considered an objective because it isn't physically provable.
Repeat that, sorry.
I think that the soul shouldn't be like scientifically considered objective because
cool.
it's not.
I just wanted to make sure.
Provable.
I want to make sure I understood because I thought you said should be and then said because it isn't, and I'm like, what? But no, you said it shouldn't be. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, that's why I say there's the speculative and there's the rational, right? The observable and the inobservable. So.
Mm-hmm. That's why, like, I think the concept of Christian Science is kind of ridiculous because science already has Christian origins, but it's obviously become its own thing.
Right, and here's the thing: like for me, like a lot of stuff with like the soul and stuff like that, I definitely think that there is a soul, but a lot of that is based strictly on feelings and ties and observations, which are at best circumstantial.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
between us, obviously we just left off at science. So
yeah, I know. Between ourselves, it is not at all necessary by that same act to get rid of the soul itself, and thus forgo one of the oldest and most venerable of hypotheses, as it is often the way with clumsy naturalists, who can hardly touch the soul without losing it. But the road... So he's saying, you don't have to get rid of the soul, you just have to remove it from science, is what he's saying.
Which I can agree with.
Yeah. But the road to new forms and refinements of the soul hypothesis stands open, and such conceptions as the mortal soul and soul as multiplicity of the subject, and soul as social structure of the drives and emotions, want henceforth to possess civic rights in science. To be sure, when the new psychologist puts an end to the superstition which was hitherto flourished around the soul idea, with almost tropical luxuriance, he has, as it were, thrust himself out into a new wilderness and a new mistrust. It may be that the older psychologists had a merrier and more comfortable time of it. Ultimately, however, he sees that, by precisely that act, he has also condemned himself to inventing the new, and who knows, perhaps finding it. Alright, now 13. Psychologists should think again before postulating the drive of self-preservation as the cardinal drive in organic being. As a living thing desires above all to vent its strength. Life as such is will to power. Self-preservation is only one of the indirect and most frequent consequences of. I disagree. I think self-preservation is everything at your core.
Yeah, I think self-preservation is the most important thing.
Like, it is literally your core. So I disagree that he says that it's only a consequence of life rather than the core of it.
Mm-hmm.
In short, here as everywhere, beware of superfluous teleological principles, such as is the drive to self-preservation. We owe it to Spinoza's inconsistency. For this is the requirement of method, which is essentially to be economy of principles. Alright, 14. It is perhaps just dawning on 5 or 6 minds that physics, too, is only an interpretation and arrangement of the world, according to our own requirements, if I may say so, and not an explanation of the world. Well, I think physics is an explanation of the world. Like, I mean, it is, again...
Yeah, it literally is.
Like, sure, it's an interpretation, but by that logic, literally nothing could be fucking, like...
Well, there's probably a reason he ended up a gibbering idiot.
Like, what is an explanation if not channeled through our interpretation, right?
Mm-hmm. Literally, Nietzsche's last words were, "Mother, I'm stupid."
That's funny. Anyway, and not an explanation of the world, but insofar as it is founded on the belief in the senses, it passes... Well, the senses are how you fucking interact with the world.
Yeah.
like, I think that the world is objectively there, that's obviously true, but your senses is how you can observe that.
Yeah.
In the eyes... sorry, hold on, let's see, where was I? Founded on the belief in senses, it passes for more than that, and must continue to do so for a long time to come. It has the eyes and hands on its side. It has the ocular evidence and palpability on its side. And it has this effect of fascinating, persuading, convincing an age with fundamentally plebeian tastes. For it instinctively follows the canon of the eternal popular sensualism. What is obvious? What has been explained? Only that which can be seen and felt. Thus far has every problem to be scrutinized. Obversely, it was precisely in opposition to palpability that the charm of the Platonic mode of thinking. Now, granted, look, I don't deny that there are things that you can misperceive, right? Obviously our perceptions are flawed.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like he's just coming short of don't believe your lying eyes, which is bullshit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's a subjectivist.
Right.
He's a believer in hybridism.
We should have hybrid here when we're doing shit like this at some point.
Yes. I would love to have hybrid here. Oh, wait, we should be doing this in general chat. Are we in general chat?
No, we're not. We're on a call.
We should be in general.
Do we want to switch over?
Yeah.
Alright, let's switch over. What are you reading and wearing? We are reading Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. And what I'm wearing is none of your damn business. It's just as much your business as the girl farting in the tub is Corbin's business. Although that actually was our business because she did it on stream.
Yeah. Yeah, I do be...
No, but I'm wearing a gray shirt and pajama bottoms. There you go. Now you know. The mystery revealed. You sick bastard.
By the way, we were at the
Platonic mode of thinking.
Yeah.
I kept track. Which was a noble mode of thinking, consisted on the part of men who perhaps rejoiced in even stronger and more exacting. My mistake. Hold on. There we go. More exacting senses than our contemporaries possess, but who knew how to experience a greater triumph in mastering them, which they did by means of pale, cold, grey conceptual nets thrown over the motley whirl of the senses. The mob of the senses, as Plato called them. This overcoming and interpretation of the world in the manner of Plato involved a kind of enjoyment different from that which the physicists of today offer us, or from that offered by the Darwinists. Remember when you used the term Darwinist and that one guy fucking chimped out? He's like, that's a term only used by creationists. It's like, no, it literally isn't.
Yeah, it's literally just the technical term.
Nietzsche just used the fucking term, and he's super atheist.
Well, he's not necessarily atheist. He conceptualizes God in many different ways.
Okay, but I wouldn't call him a creationist, would you?
Yeah, he's well, like I said, he's like subjectivist. He doesn't fucking know what he believes.
Beyond Good and Evil, the Dreamcast game? I mean, maybe that's where it got... I mean, it clearly took its name from this, right?
I mean, yeah, it obviously got its name from that.
Anyway, Darwinists and anti-teleologists among the laborers in physiology. With their principle of the smallest possible effort and the greatest possible stupidity. Where man has nothing more to see or grasp, he has nothing more to do. That is certainly a different imperative from the Platonic. You know, here's a question, right? Why the fuck has Platonic become associated with, like, the opposite of romantic?
I don't know.
Like, when it comes to love, right? Like, you have platonic friends.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me.
Like, did Plato talk about the nature of relationships in a way that was opposed to the concept of romantic love, or...?
I mean, not as far as I'm aware. But to be fair, I haven't read much of Plato.
Right. Anyway, and the greatest possible stupidity. Where man has nothing more to see or grasp, he has nothing more to do. That is certainly a different imperative from the Platonic. Okay, so I went a little back, but it's fine. But for an uncouth, industrious race of machinists and bridge builders of the future, I think machinists and machinists are both correct, and I don't know which I prefer. Because I said machinists, but I'm like, is that how I want to say it, you know?
Yeah, I think machinist sounds better.
Yeah. And bridge builders of the future, which has nothing but coarse work to get through. It may well be the right one. All right.
Do you want to read 15?
I can do 15, and then you take over with 16. How's that?
Okay. 16 looks long as hell, though. Yeah, but I will.
Well, I mean, you weren't just going to do 15 and then jump and then stop.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's why I'm like, I'll do this next short one. You know what I mean?
I'm not opposed.
If one is to pursue physiology with a good conscience, one is compelled to insist that the organs of sense are not phenomena in the sense of idealist philosophy. For if they were, they could not be causes. Sensualism, therefore, is at least regulative hypothesis, which certainly a heuristic principle. What? I love this! Like, a lot of mine, it literally just has dash and then what? Question mark?
Yeah, what? like he's asking himself, like, what?
Yeah! And others even
what
go...
What the hell did I just say?
Right. And, like, he's probably using it rhetorically as if, like, someone is asking him that question, right? But...
Yeah.
And others go even so far as to say that the external world is the work of our organs. Well, if anyone says that, they're fucking stupid. Like, obviously the world objectively exists around us. Obviously I'm not saying that our senses are literally everything, but they are how we perceive things. So, like, Nietzsche's too dismissive of them, but I do agree to an extent that you can't rely solely on those.
Well, is that said? He became an idiot shitting his pants. That's what happens when you deny objective reality.
Yeah. Howdy, Spencer.
Hello.
Hey, we're reading Nietzsche.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, where was I? But then our body, as a piece of this external world, would be the work of our organs. But then our organs themselves would be the work of our organs. This, it seems to me, is a complete reductio ad absurdum. Supposing the concept causa sui is something altogether absurd. Consequently, the external world is not the work of our organs. I agree. The outside world is not created by our organs. Very good job.
Okay,
I so agree.
Okay, so we were criticizing him where he was, but see, like, he words things in a confusing way.
Well, no. No, Corbin, I wasn't criticizing, because the thing is, he's more dismissive than I would be about the senses and our perception. But I agree in concept with him that some people who, like, if you rely solely on that, you're not going to get anywhere. But on the other hand, I think we've moved too far away from that. Everybody's going too much on the whole academic bullshit and stuff like that, that I think it is actually important to kind of get back to the basics to a degree.
There are still harmless self-observers who believe that there are immediate certainties. For instance, I think, or as the superstition of Schopenhauer. I love Schopenhauer is another one we need to read as well.
Yeah, he's that guy who came up with like he was Schopenhauer was like the one who like said I'm gonna get the quote so wrong, but something about like to live is to have pain or something, and like wasn't there something with pain?
Yeah, like his philosophy was like literally he's the philosopher of pessimism.
Yeah.
Like his philosophy is considered like one of the darkest philosophies. Schopenhauer puts it, I will, as though cognition here got hold of its object purely and simply as the thing in itself, without any falsification taking place either on the part of the subject or the object. I would repeat it, however, 100 times, that immediate certainty, as well as absolute knowledge, and the thing in itself involve a contradictio in adjecto. We really ought to free ourselves from the misleading significance of words. The people on their part may think that cognition is knowing all about things, but the philosopher must say to himself, when I analyze the process that is expressed in the sentence, I think, I find a whole series of daring assertions, the argumentative proof of which would be difficult, perhaps impossible, for instance, that it is I who think that there must necessarily be something that thinks. That thinking is an activity and operation on the part of a being who is thought of as a cause, and there is an ego. And finally, that it is already determined what is to be designated by thinking, that I know what thinking is, for I had not already decided within myself what it is. By what standard could I determine whether that which is just happening is not perhaps willing or feeling? In short, the assertion, I think, assumes that I compare my state at the present moment with other states of myself, which I know, in order to determine what it is on account of this retrospective connection with further knowledge. It has at any rate no immediate certainty for me. In place of the immediate certainty in which the people may believe in the special case, the philosopher thus finds a series of metaphysical questions presented to him. Veritable conscience questions of the intellect, to wit, from whence did I get the notion of thinking? Why do I believe in cause and effect? What gives me the right to speak of an ego, and even of an ego, and as cause, and finally of an ego as cause of thought? He who ventures to answer these metaphysical questions at once by an appeal to a sort of intuitive perception, like the person who says, I think and know that this, at least, is true, actual, and certain, will encounter a smile and two notes of interrogation in a philosopher nowadays. Sir, the philosopher will perhaps give him to understand it is improbable that you are not mistaken, but why should it be the truth? With regard to the superstitions of logicians, I shall never tire of emphasizing a small, terse fact which is unwillingly recognized by these credulous minds, namely that a thought comes when it wishes and not when I wish, so that it is a perversion of the fact of that is how thinking works, though. Like, all of your thoughts are already sort of, I mean, I don't know if predetermined is the correct word, but like you don't will your thoughts when you think you do. Your thoughts are unconsciously provided to you, and then you interpret those thoughts, and then they come out. Like, you organize those thoughts later through the ego.
Okay.
Howdy, Pilgrim. By the way, Tysons, we are reading philosophy, so we're reading Nietzsche, so don't. So we're not going to be talking about things a lot of things outside of that. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna head out then, so you guys can do that.
All right, see you later.
Wow.
Not to. I don't mean to be a dick or anything. I just don't want him interrupting. Like.
Well, if
the whole
anyone's
point of
likely
what
to
we're
derail, it's going to be him. Like, if it's Edgar, I'd just say, "Hey, Edgar, leave."
Yeah. Unwillingly recognized by these credulous minds, namely that a thought comes when it wishes and not when I wish, so that it is a perversion of the facts of the case to say that the subject I is the condition of the predicate think. One thinks, but that this one is precisely the famous old ego, is, to put it mildly, only a supposition. Also, I think Sigmund Freud basically says a lot of the same things Nietzsche does, but in actually a much more structured and more easily understandable way.
Right.
Is precisely the famous old ego is, to put it mildly, only a supposition, an assertion, and assuredly not an immediate certainty. After all, one has even gone too far with this. One thinks even the one contains an interpretation of the process and does not belong to the process itself. One infers here according to the usual grammatical formula. To think is an activity. Every activity requires an agency that is active consequentially. It was pretty much on the same lines that the older atomism sought, besides the operating power, the material particle wherein it resides and out of which it operates, the atom. More rigorous minds, however, learnt at last to get along without this earth residuum, okay. And perhaps someday we shall accustom ourselves, even from the logician's point of view, to get along without the little one, to which the worthy old ego has refined itself. It is certainly not the least charm of a theory that it is refutable. It is precisely thereby that it attracts the more subtle minds. It seems that the 100 times refuted theory of the free will owes its persistence to this charm alone. Someone is always appearing who feels himself strong enough to refute it. Philosophers are accustomed to speak of the will as though it were the best known thing in the world. Indeed, Schopenhauer has given us to understand that the will alone is really known to us, absolutely and completely known, without deduction or addition. But it again and again seems to me that in this case, Schopenhauer also only did what philosophers are in the habit of doing. He seems to have adopted a popular prejudice and exaggerated it. Willing seems to me to be above all something complicated, something that is a unity only in name, and it is precisely in a name that popular prejudice lurks, which has got the mastery over the inadequate precautions of philosophers in all ages. So let us for once be more cautious, let us be unphilosophical, let us say that in all willing there is firstly a plurality of sensations, namely the sensation of the condition away from which we go, the sensation of the condition towards which we go, the sensation of this from and towards itself, and then besides an accompanying muscular sensation which, even without our putting in motion arms and legs, commences in action by force of habit. Directly we will anything. Therefore, just as sensations, and indeed many kinds of sensations, are to be recognized as ingredients of the will, so in the second place, thinking is also to be recognized in every act of the will. There is a ruling thought, and let us not imagine it possible to sever this thought from the willing, as if the will would then remain over. In the third place, the will is not the will is not only a complex of sensation and thinking, but it is above all an emotion, and in fact the emotion of the command. That which is termed freedom of the will is essentially the
what
emotion
about the triumph
of
of the will?
In respect to him who must obey, I am free, he must obey. This consciousness is inherent in every will, and equally so the straining of the attention, the straight look which fixes itself exclusively on one thing, the unconditional judgment that this and nothing else is necessary now, the inward certainty that obedience will be rendered, and whatever else pertains to the position of the commander. A man who wills commands something within himself, which renders obedience, or which he believes renders obedience. But now let us notice what is the strangest thing about the will. This affair so extremely complex, for which the people have only one name, inasmuch as in the given circumstances we are at the same time the commanding and the obeying parties,
and as the obeying party, we know the sensations of constraint, impulsion, pressure, resistance, and motion, which usually commence immediately after the act of will, inasmuch as, on the other hand, we are accustomed to disregard this duality and to deceive ourselves about it by means of the synthetic term I. A whole series of erroneous conclusions and consequently of false judgments about the will itself has become attached to the act of willing, to such a degree that he who wills believes firmly that willing suffices for action. Since in the majority of cases there has only been exercise of will, when the effect of the command, consequently obedience and therefore action, was to be expected, the appearance has translated itself into the sentiment, and is as if there were a necessity of effect. In a word, he who wills believes with a fair amount of certainty that will and action are somehow one. He ascribes the carrying out of the willing, to the will itself, and thereby enjoys an increase of the sensation of power which accompanies all success, freedom of will, that is the expression for the complex state of delight of the person exercising volition, who commands and at the same time identifies himself with the executor of the order, who as such enjoys also the triumph over obstacles, but thinks within himself that it was really his own will that overcame them. In this way, the person exercising volition adds the feelings of delight of the successful executive instruments, the useful underwills of undersouls. Indeed, our body is but a social structure composed of many souls. I actually really...
I understand what he's saying, but only because I've read Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud explains a lot of these things in a much more, I think, scientifically grounded way. Like how that we, like, I think Nietzsche is saying, like, we identify with our ego, even though we are driven by our unconscious. Like, there is a deeper sense of us which is made up of multiple personalities, which would be like multiple souls, which even fits in my idea that that your souls are sort of fragment. Like, I believe that, like, when we die, we don't just go to one direct place, but that our soul splits off into multiple different places. Like, part of our soul goes off into our children and so on. But, like, I think I understand what he's saying, though, that, like, who we are is made up of multiple different personalities within us, that we just structure them through our ego, and then we identify ourselves with our ego. So that isn't correct. That there is and that we are sort of multiple people in one person.
Well, I mean, the duality of man has always been like a thing that people think about, right? Like, the shadow self and like the other aspects of your personality, because there's parts of your personality that are very contradictory to other parts of your personality, and that's true for literally everyone.
But also, not even just that, but that the part of ourselves that we identify with is just the interpretation of all of those other different parts.
Yeah.
Indeed, our body is but a social structure composed of many souls. To his feelings of delight as commander, l'effect c'est moi. What happens here is what happens in every well-constructed and happy commonwealth, namely that the governing class...
What is this, Fallout 4?
Namely that the governing class identifies itself with the success of the commonwealth. In all willing, it is absolutely a question of commanding and obeying on the basis, as already said, of a social structure composed of many souls, on which account a philosopher should claim the right to include the willing as such within the sphere of morals, regarded as the doctrine of the relations of supremacy under which the phenomenon of life manifests itself. I think you can read 20. I fucking read a lot there.
Yeah, you did. Let's see.
And I'm actually gonna put the bookmark in for me because I'm gonna work out while you're reading that.
Okay.
Because I can just.
Well, what I'm thinking, Corbin, is we wrap up part 1 and then call it good on this. So 23 will be the last one, I think. That sound fair? Because then we'll be done with part 1.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sure.
Because I think that's probably a good stopping point.
All right. Are you reading all of the rest then?
Potentially, yeah. Were you going to say something, Spencer?
No.
Okay. I thought I heard you
Well,
say
after
something.
after that, do you want to switch to another book, or are you going to do something else?
I don't know. What? You still wanted to hang out, right, Spencer?
If you're still down.
Yeah. Considering it's your last day in town, right?
Yeah.
Well, all right. We can leave it after this then.
And then do you think I should edit this into multiple parts when I put it on your channel, like for this, what we've read today, or should I just do it all as one and then maybe edit it down a little bit?
I mean, it could probably be better as multiple parts. That way it could be edited better. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. I don't plan to do, like, a ton of super extensive editing. Otherwise, it's never getting uploaded.
Yeah, but what I mean is, like, if it's in parts, it's easier to edit those parts individually anyway.
Right. 20. That individual philosophical concepts are not something arbitrary, something growing up autonomously, but on the contrary, grown up, connected, and related to one another. That however suddenly and arbitrary they appear to emerge in history of thought, rather. Hold on, since I'm going to be reading this last little bit, I'm going to go ahead and save and quit the Fallout game, and I'm going to put Cinnamon on the screen, because, you know, that's super philosophical.
Yeah.
Very.
It'll be funny, though, because Corbin, in the videos, when I upload them, it's going to go from Fallout 3 to Cinnamon at some point in them, because, you know, since we're going to divide this up. How many parts do you think? I guess we'll just see, right? Like, maybe do, like, 10 to 15-minute segments or something?
Yeah.
Or 30 if I can't find a good stopping point other than that. I don't know. We've been going for about an hour and a half, so 3 30-minute segments might be sufficient. Plus, you know, I'll edit out certain parts, like where I'm talking here. Like, I'll leave in some of the fun conversation and some of the dumb shit we've said. But but I'll edit out some of the parts where we get just a little, like right now, I'm editing out everything I'm saying now, obviously.
Yeah.
On the contrary, grew up, connected and related to one another. That however suddenly and arbitrarily they appear to emerge in the history of thought, they nonetheless belong just as much to a system as do the members of the fauna of a continent. That fact is, in the end, also shown in the fact that the most diverse philosophers unfailingly fill out, again and again, a certain basic scheme of possible philosophies. Under the invisible spell, they always trace once more the identical orbit. However independent of one another they may fill, with their will to criticism or systematism, something in return, something in them leads them, something drives them in a definite order, one after another. It is precisely that innate systematism and relationship of concepts. Their thinking is, in fact, not so much a discovering as a recognizing, a remembering, a return and homecoming to a far-off, primordial total household of the soul out of those concepts once emerged. Philosophizing is to that extent a species of atavism of the first rank. The singular family resemblance between all Indian, Greek, and German philosophizing is easy enough to explain. Where there exists a language affinity, it is quite impossible, thanks to the common philosophy of grammar, I mean thanks to unconscious domination and directing by similar grammatical functions, to avoid everything being prepared in advance for a similar evolution and succession of philosophical systems, just as the road seems to be barred to certain other possibilities of the world interpretation. Philosophers within the domain of the Altaic languages, in which the concept of subject is least developed, will in all probability look into the world differently and be found on different paths from Indo-Germans and Moslems. Moslems? Is that like a Muslim? Is that like Muslim?
I think it's
No,
Muslim.
that's like the Moblins.
Moblins?
It's Muslimans for me.
Yeah, it says Moslems for me. Moslems.
Huh. For me, it literally says Mussulmans.
Huh. The spell of definite grammatical functions is, in the last resort, the spell of physiological value, judgments, and racial conditions. So much, by the way, of retort to Locke's superficiality with regard to the origin of ideas. The causa sui is the best self-contradiction hitherto imagined, a kind of logical rape and unnaturalness. By mankind's
Rape?
Yes. By mankind's extravagant
Bad.
pride, logical rape, the best kind of rape. Well, second
The
best.
logical.
I literally just says violent.
Best.
But mankind's extravagant pride has managed to get itself deeply and frightfully entangled with precisely this piece of nonsense. For the desire for freedom of will, in that metaphysical superlative sense, which is unfortunately still dominant in the minds of the half-educated. Like Hardluck. The desire
Oh,
to...
shit.
Yeah. The desire to bear the whole and sole responsibility for one's actions and to absolve God, world, ancestors, chance, society from responsibility for them is nothing less than the desire to be precisely that causa sui with more than Munchausen temerity. To put oneself into existence out of the swamp of nothingness by one's own hair. Assuming it is possible in this way to get beyond the peasant simplicity of this celebrated concept, free will, and banish it from one's mind. I would then ask whoever does that... What? In the butt.
Oh, I was just like... Oh, never mind. Just keep reading.
Okay. Well, you seemed confused.
Wait, well, I didn't let it
mind.
finish, so just keep reading.
Okay, Corbin. I would then ask whoever does that to carry his enlightenment a step further and also banish from his mind the contrary of that unnatural concept, free will. I mean unfree will, which amounts to an abuse of cause and effect. One ought not to make cause and effect into material things, as natural scientists do, and those who, like them, naturalize in their thinking in accordance with the prevailing mechanistic stupidity, which has cause, press, and push until it produces an effort. One might employ cause and effect only as pure concepts. What's up?
Try that. I put some of the seasoning on the popcorn.
Yeah, that works.
It's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not what I expected.
Yeah, not bad.
What book is that?
Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. It's a philosophy book. We're doing a stream on my channel that I'm probably going to unlist and then edit and put into Corbin's channel. Because what I'm thinking is, The live show segments will be exclusive. You watch them in the moment, and if you miss it, better have the link. Because I think that makes it more fun, because then it's really more your content that's just premiering on mine before it's edited.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah. And also we got Cinnamon on the screen right now, because he's the philosopher of our times.
When you listen to it on Corbin's channel, you don't get to hear about my popcorn with mesquite seasoning in it.
Correct. So really they're missing out.
They're missing out a lot.
Yeah.
In accordance with the prevailing mechanistic stupidity, which has the cause to press and push until it produces an effect, and one ought to employ cause and effect only as pure concepts. That is to say, as conventional fictions for the purpose of designation, mutual understanding, not explanation. In itself, there is nothing of causal connection, of necessity, of psychological unfreedom. There is the effect does not follow the cause. There no law rules. It is we alone who have fabricated causes. No, causes are real, you fucking idiot.
No, causes never existed.
Succession,
Fake.
reciprocity, relatively, compulsion, number, law, freedom, motive, purpose. And when we falsely introduce this world of symbols into things and mingle it with them as though this symbol world were an in itself, we once more behave as we have always behaved, namely, mythologically. Unfree will is mythology. Yeah, but you're just making it up right now. You're saying, if there's free will, there must be unfree will, and we need to get rid of both. The fuck are you talking about? I guess I guess there are compulsions that we don't have. Like, we don't will ourselves to breathe, right? We don't will ourselves to wake up once we've fallen asleep. There's things like that I suppose would be unfree will. But I don't think that the concept of unfree will is really a thing that we can say is on the same level as free will. I guess you could argue with things like compulsions and addictions and things like that. Maybe that's what he's getting at. But to deny that free will is a concept that exists, I mean, granted, that's just deterministic at this point, then, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think his views are very deterministic. He is a subjectivist, determinist, blah, blah, blah.
In real life, it is only a question of strong and weak wills. It is almost a symptom of what is lacking in himself, whether a thinker detects in every causal connection and psychological necessity something of compulsion, exigency, constraint, pressure, unfreedom. Such feelings are traitors. They're rebel spies and traitors. Take them away. And the person who has them gives himself away. And if I have observed correctly, unfreedom of will is, in general, conceived as a problem from two complete antithetical standpoints. So is he talking about authoritarianism, then? But always in...
Well, he definitely is an authoritarian,
Right, so is he saying that people who don't like not having free will, so people who are under authoritarianism, that he's just saying, well, you're stupid and you need to accept why this is real? Or why actually you're wrong and free will is an illusion? Is that what he's getting at, maybe?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, I think you can see why a lot of the things he says appeals to, Nazis.
Well, yeah, Nazis, built a lot of their ideology around shit this guy said, so...
Yeah.
Unfreedom of will is
And
general...
it's funny when they deny it, when they're like, oh, no, we didn't base our views off of Nietzsche, but it's like...
You clearly did.
Determinism, the subjectivism, determinism, and his views on free will, authority, power, all of these things are very reminiscent of shit I hear from white nationalists all the time.
Yeah. Unfreedom of will is in general conceived as a problem from two completely antithetical standpoints, but always in a profoundly personal manner. One will at no price give up his responsibility, his belief in himself, the personal right to hit his deserts. The vain races belong here. The other, on the contrary, will not be responsible for anything, to blame for anything, and out of the inner self-contempt wants to be able to shift off his responsibility for himself somewhere else. This latter, when he writes books, tends today to espouse the cause of the criminal. His most pleasing disguise is a kind of socialist sympathy, and the fatalism of the weak-willed is indeed beautified to an astonishing degree when it can present itself as la religion de la souffrance humaine. That is, its good taste. 22. I don't know why it had to be in French, you know what I mean? But, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think it's annoying because it's like, well, I don't fucking know what it means when you say.
Well, like I can more or less tell what that means. Like, you know, like in that case, it's like, you know, the religion of human will or something to that effect, right? Like that's kind of what that means. But like, why not just say that?
Yeah, that's what I mean though. Is it like Nietzsche? Like a lot of times, just like quote things in another language and then just leave it up to you to use context clues to figure out what the hell that means without.
Well, like, look, I think there is like value, like there can be poetic or like there can be reasons for like I can't think of any substantive reasons, but there can be
I just
having like
correct.
What I was gonna say is having like Latin mottos and stuff like that can be cool. But it doesn't necessarily do anything. Like, it can maybe be used to motivate because it sounds cool. So maybe from a rhetorical standpoint, there can be, like, an element of that there, but...
Personally, I like direct presentation over poetic shit.
I would largely agree, but I do think that poetic... I think that... poetic words can't, like, using words in a way that's not just straight up prose, like using words in a way that's like poetic or metaphorical or stuff like that, like that can have an impact that people remember more because of the way it was used. So I can understand that to a degree, but when you do that like every other paragraph and it's just like, it's here's some stuff in Latin, here's some shit in French, here's some Greek. It's like, why?
Would you like me to read the rest?
Do you want to read the rest, Corbin?
Sure.
Okay. I don't mind either way, so...
Let me be pardoned as an old philologist who cannot philologist? For me, it just says philologist.
Well, yeah. I guess you're right. I'm adding an I that isn't there subconsciously. You're right.
Who cannot desist from the mischief of putting his finger on bad modes of interpretation.
Putting his finger in the bum?
Conformity to the law, of which you physicists talk so proudly as though why it exists only owing to your interpretation and bad philology. It is no matter of fact, no text, but rather just a naively humanitarian adjustment and perversion of meaning, with which you make abundant concessions to the democratic instincts of the modern soul. Everywhere equality before the law, nature is not different in that respect, nor better than we, a fine instance of secret motive in which the vulgar antagonism to everything privileged and autocratic, likewise a second and more refined atheism is once more disguised. I'm not even bothering. That also is what you want, that, and therefore cheers for natural law. Is it not so? But
ni Dio ni matre? Matra? Yeah, no, fuck it.
Yeah, that also
Ne deux,
is what,
ne matre. It's French. There we go.
yeah. That also is what you want, and therefore cheers for natural law. Is it not so, but as has been said, that is interpretation, not text, and somebody might come along who, with opposite intentions and modes of interpretation, could read out of the same nature, and with regard to the same phenomena, just the just the tyrannically inconsiderate and relentless enforcement of the claims of power. An interpreter who should so place the unexceptionalness and unconditionalness of all will to power before your eyes that almost every word in the word tyranny itself would eventually seem unsuitable, or like a weakening and softening metaphor, as being too human, and who should nevertheless end by asserting the same about this world as you do, namely, that it has a necessary and calculable course, not however because laws obtain in it, but because they are absolutely lacking, and every power affects its ultimate consequences every moment. Granted that this also is only interpretation, and you will be eager enough to make this objection. Well, so much the better. All psychology hitherto has run aground on moral prejudices and timidities. It has not dared to launch out into the depths, insofar as it is allowable to recognize in that which has hitherto been written evidence of that which has hitherto been kept silent. It seems as if nobody had yet harbored the notion of psychology as the morphology and development doctrine of the will to power as I conceive of it. The power of moral prejudices has penetrated deeply into the most intellectual world, the world apparently most indifferent and unprejudiced, and has obviously operated in an injurious, obstructive, blinding, and distorting manner. A proper physiopsychology has to contend with unconscious antagonism in the heart of the investigator. It has the heart against it, even a doctrine of the reciprocal conditionalness of the good and the bad impulses causes as refined immorality, distress and aversion in a still strong and manly conscience, still more so a doctrine of the derivation of all good impulses from bad ones. If, however, a person should regard even the emotions of hatred, envy, covetousness, and imperiousness as life-conditioning emotions, as factors which may be present fundamentally and essentially in the general economy of life, which must therefore be further developed if life is to be further developed, he will suffer from such a view of things as from seasickness. And yet the hypothesis is far from being the strangest and most painful in the immense and almost new domain of dangerous knowledge. And there are in fact 100 good reasons why everyone should keep away from it who can do so. On the other hand, if one has once drifted hither with one's bark, well, very good. Now let us set our teeth firmly. Let us open our eyes and keep our hand fast on. Well, yeah. Open our eyes and keep our hand fast on the helm. I corrected myself, damn you. We sailed away right over. We struck out. We destroy perhaps the remains of our own morality by daring to make our voyage thither. But what do we matter? Never yet did a profounder world of insight reveal itself to daring travelers and adventurers, and the psychologist who thus makes a sacrifice. It is not the sacrificio del intelletto, on the contrary, will at least be entitled to demand in return that psychology shall once more be recognized as the queen of the sciences, for whose service and equipment the other sciences exist, for psychology is once more the path to the fundamental problems. Okay, that's it.
All right. Well, that's part one of Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. And I think one thing that'll make our reading very unique is that we're reading two completely different versions.
Yeah.
And so, like every time we switch, it's different versions. So, the translation's different. But
at least it's numbered, so we don't get lost.
Yeah, that definitely makes it easier. I do wonder. Did Freud write in German originally as well, or?
Yeah.
So there's probably going to be differences in translations when we do interpretation of dreams as well.
Yeah, but at least when we read Ayn Rand, that'll be a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because it's just.
All right. Well, nearly 2 hours there, so that'll give me a good amount of shit to edit down into segments.